hip movement or shoulder or torso rotational movement, no amount of strength is going to keep the hips still. So you're not going to be able to use the legs as well. So again, yeah, coming back to what should be most still in a movement, and then running, it should, around that torso, shoulders, and into hips. So start there.
Hey, welcome to the Body's Built Better podcast. I am your host, Jackie Tan, and I'm pumped to have you here today. This show is all about human performance, whether that's running your next PB or nailing your next presentation. This show is for you. We explore the body's incredible ability to heal, adapt, and evolve so you can crush your limitations, reconnect your body and mind, and discover your extraordinary potential. And today on the show, I am super excited to be talking with running technique coach Paul Mackinnon of The Balanced Runner. We talk all things running technique, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what doesn't matter that you do, and so much more. I loved this conversation. You're going to get so much out of this. So without further ado, let's get straight into this with Paul Mackinnon. Paul, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Welcome to the Body's Built Better podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's actually a really nice afternoon to be indoors here in Melbourne. So you've actually done me a favour, to be honest.
Very good. Indoors in Melbourne, though, I'd say that happens a lot, doesn't it?
Nah, well, yeah, you probably could say that. But I'm originally from Canberra, so maybe it's a little bit better option. It's not quite as cold at night.
Oh, this is true.
Yeah, or are you having a crack at our lockdowns?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm really excited about this conversation. As a remedial massage therapist, I work with a lot of athletes, a lot of runners, triathletes, and obviously all types of sports, and they all require running. And so one thing that comes up, especially, when people see me and they got their little niggles and soft tissue injuries, is running technique. So I'm excited to dive deeper into this today with you. But before we get into that, you didn't start as a runner. You're a hockey player for 15 years, 2 indoor World Cup with Australia as well.
Yep. Yeah.
So tell us about that time of your life and then how you eventually came into running coaching.
It's probably like a few different factors rolled into one to get to this point. And it was probably only reflecting on it 12 months ago to realize what I've done is actually made up to the ability to do what I'm now doing. So hockey was was a family sport. I'm the youngest of 3, so I got into that as a result of just seeing older siblings, 6 or 7 years older. I didn't really have much of an opportunity to choose anything else, I think.
You're doing this.
Yeah, you're doing this. So it was just like, oh, well, they're doing it, I'll do that. And in Canberra, big fish, small pond. I think once you're okay at it, you kind of stick to those things a little bit more readily. And look, I genuinely did love it as well. I reckon, was it probably about, I think I was 17, I started playing National League in Australia. So National League is kind of the national comp, and did that for, I think 15, 16 years between Canberra and then down in Melbourne. I moved to and played for Victoria. And in that time, though, as you mentioned, the World Cups, the indoor, I got a high level within Australia for outdoor, but just, wasn't good enough, and going through like a period where we won gold medals and were sort of top of the world for a long period of time. And it was a hard group to crack into. And, subsequently not quite good enough to get into that. But then played in Europe for 5 seasons as well. So I lived and worked playing hockey. So that was my job in Holland for 4 years and Spain for a year. So I got to kind of spend a bit of time living overseas playing hockey as my job. And that was a pretty cool experience, both in just learning lifestyle, growing up for a lot of period, for a lot of those experiences. Running is an interesting one. Like I remember mid-teens, late teens, always being much more interested in running. or wanting to do a lot more running, and it was for hockey, but I was really interested in 5K, 10K runners, and I've mentioned it a few times that if you play that game as a kid, if you could be elite at any sport, what would you be? And, like you often hear golf or tennis or quarterback. And I remember saying like 10K runner, which was dumb as a financial response, but I sort of I had a real interest in it early. And in Canberra, there's amazing fire trails around the place to do running, and yeah, I just like to do it on the outside of hockey training. Used to go out there, but that also subsequently kind of led into what I'm doing now. And I remember out running on a dirt path and just hearing different footsteps. Like it just sounded different. It just didn't make sense for me as to why that would be. And just started to change things up in the top half of my body just to start to work out how that influenced the bottom half. And that was kind of almost like the start of the process of starting to question what had always been done for coaching for running and or how that influences movement patterns. So that was probably a start in the interest side of running movement and how everything connects. But then through the hockey, also met a coach who would do our speed and agility, who I started to chat to him about that sort of stuff, and he was kind of on a similar path in coaching and retraining athletes into that kind of gait side of things. So I think together, and I learned a fair bit off him, but then kind of went on my own little path and did teaching as a degree. So all of them just kind of started to package up into what is my real passion, which is the movement patterns of running and how that influences and affects individuals.
Yeah, amazing. And looking back on your time at hockey and the training and the drills, are there things that you think now, oh, could have done that better, or should have done it this way, or alternatively, flip side, that was still great, still use that now?
Um, Probably more of the former. In how to learn a skill, even if it's just say the hockey side of it, how to teach a skill, how to learn a skill, and what it makes up to actually be able to replicate new skills to create that habit forming, which is then what I use and implement in the coaching now with the kind of the new way, old way. So once you can understand and feel, have that like kinesthetic awareness of what your current movement pattern or skill feels like and what it should feel like, all of a sudden you yourself have that contrast. So if we can kind of take it back into learning skills within hockey itself, then it's probably not something that's done in a really good manner holistically in coaching, or essentially skill development. So that's probably one of them. Yeah, I'm sure that there's heaps of things you could redo and do better for sure. Like you kind of reflect and go, oh no, I was like, at the time I thought, I'm doing everything I could to get the most. But the reality is you're not, like, well, I wasn't anyway. So there's plenty of those sort of things which aren't necessarily regrets or anything, but it is, you go, oh, okay, it's probably more of a realization, and that's probably just in itself as healthy as anything, because you go, okay, well, I can understand that I wasn't, which probably almost gives you that solace to, okay, well, if you did, maybe you could, maybe you couldn't, but you kind of accept that you didn't, and that's okay. That was okay for that period of time. So yeah, there's plenty of stuff that you
Yeah.
damage. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to know, you had 5 knee surgeries before the age of 21.
Jeez, you've done well there.
I do my research. I
Yeah,
take that
you've done
very
that. Yeah,
seriously.
you've done that very well. I don't know where you could have even found that.
So,
Yeah.
I think it's a
Yes.
really important thing to mention, because I feel like people now, your recreational runners, they, as soon as a knee injury comes up, or they've had a knee surgery, or they hear meniscus tear or ligament, whatever it is, I think it sort of just freaks them out a bit and think that running is well off the table. You've had 5 knee surgeries before the age of
Yeah.
21. Can you tell us, how did you manage your surgeries, and then how do you manage it now so that you can still run?
Um, So my first was when I was 16, which was meniscus. And so there was removal or partial removal of some meniscus. The second two were, the second two were a thing called osteochondritis. So where the cartilage at the end of the femur, in my case, was dying, falling off. So it fell off mid session, like mid hockey session at one point. I felt it go, lifted up, and there was a big lump on the inside of my knee, pushed it, went back in the knee, went to the sideline, pulled up my tracksuit pants again because it was Canberra. The lump was on the other side of the knee, pushed it, went back in. So there was sizable one. The first one was at about the size of a 10-cent piece that was falling off the end of the femur.
Wow. Was that painful to push it back in, or is that just...
No, it was just more scary, really.
Yeah.
So I think, how was I? I was about 18 at that stage. So I had to go in, get that removed, and they kind of shaved it down and tried to create some sort of bleeding because it was down to the bone. It wasn't just the cartilage. And then 8 days later, 2 more little bits fell off. So I had to have surgery again within that 2-week time frame. So there's 2. We can count that as one, but it was 2. So that has left very little articular cartilage on the lateral femoral condyle. Oh, yeah, on the lateral side. Anyway, it's more of a non-weight bearing area, but it's still there. And then the fourth one was another meniscus, so all on the left side, and it was creating a cyst out the side of the knee. So I was sort of creating this, quite a lump on the outside of the knee. So it was stitched the meniscus back up and remove the cyst, which wasn't ideal. And then 6 months later, the cartilage hadn't repaired, so it was then removed. So that's all on that left side. So within 4 years, I had those 5 surgeries, and it did. Obviously, it affected what is quite important years of development in a physical nature, like that kind of the 16 to 20. It was probably more fortunate that I was a little bit of a later developer, definitely maturity-wise, physically, definitely. And in some ways, it probably slowed me down a little bit when I wasn't as physically developed in that time frame, but it did kind of cost me a little bit of time off. I guess the way of managing it was, I was lucky to have a really good physio in Canberra who did a bit of push and pull and sort of took care of me as well. At the time that I didn't like it, I was frustrated. My coach as well did kind of hold me back a little bit, just knowing that I'd had a few problems. So there's some outside influence in that regard. But since then, doing elite level hockey for so long, I was really conscious of knowing my limitations on the hockey field, which was probably more of a physical speed and strength. Always could run out games and was really known to be endurance based, being able to get around the ground. But that kind of strength and speed, because I'm not huge, 178 and I'm way not much. So I knew I had to be in the gym a lot. So I was really, really fastidious in making sure that I was kind of there for a long period of time and consistently. And I think that really helped in regards to just kind of that safeguarding and protecting. I'd hardly had a soft tissue injury in my whole career. And part to do with that, I think, is the technical side to it, and part to the conditioning side to it. And maybe I just didn't run fast enough. Maybe there's that part too. I don't think I did take very good care of it. I hardly drank when I was sort of in my 20s. I made sure I kind of took care of that side of things. So I think that helped. But even now, I don't have too many problems with it. I still run. I've gone back to hockey stupidly. So I haven't run as much during the weeks, but I can get out to kind of 60, 70 Ks and not be bothered by it. And I think it was probably all that conditioning through a long period of time that's helped it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I'm looking forward to diving deep into technique.
Yes.
But
you got more background questions?
No. Here we go. Tell us about your approach to running technique.
So I'm probably a lot uh I'm flipped compared to the normal. I'm top down. My approach is all top down. Everything that influences the feet, the leg biomechanics, and how they work are influenced or affected by what happens at hips up. So how you hold your spinal position, your shoulders, how those movement patterns occur, are all going to influence how you can use your legs. So if your feet are, the contact point between body and ground, there's no way you're going to be able to change them in a really efficient or with a long-term focus if you haven't actually at least considered and understand what's happening above them. So I'm top down. The movement patterns that occur up there, how even they are, what is left and right dominant. So it's that's in a nutshell my philosophy, and then like obviously broadens out depending on each individual.
Yeah, I love that because it's one thing that I believe runners don't even think about because running you do with your legs. So let's focus on the legs.
Yeah,
But if you've got a funky shoulder or a lovely little head bobble, I mean that's
yeah.
going to affect the run. So speaking of head bobble, before we get into what is good, I thought we'd get into what is bad because I think we've all seen someone with not so great running technique. I mean, I run, or I actually don't run too much at the moment, but when I'm out on the beach path, I see a lot of runners and you see all sorts of limbs doing all sorts of actions. And I think we can picture that and we know, okay, that's not right. So tell us about the stuff that we shouldn't be doing.
Whoa. Where do you
How
start?
long do you have?
Where do you start? Yeah, we're going to get into that
Let's start
three
at the
hour
head.
time. But well, I think a head's probably is a funny one. Like a head is actually a ballast. So anything you do, your head's going to actually react to. So um, I think that's probably the wrong place to start. To be
Okay,
honest, sorry,
right.
Jackie.
Let's go down.
Let's
Let's
go.
start
Let's
at
go.
the shoulder.
Yeah, so I'm more about kind of if you think about a movement pattern or if you think about a skill and you think, okay, what should be the most still or what should be stationary in a movement? And if you can start from there, so if you think about like something, even something like a closed motor skill, like a golf swing, part that's most still is the feet. Now, if you don't have the feet in the right position, nothing you do throughout the whole movement pattern is going to matter if you've got your feet next to each other or you're kind of pointing them the wrong way. So it's like, okay, well, where do you start? Similar to like a deadlift or a squat, whatever is most stationary or most still through that movement. How about we start with there? What's influencing it? How is it being influenced? What should it be like? Now, with running, as I said, that's why it's completely flipped because the thing that moves the most are the feet. So it's really hard to start from the foot if that's the thing that is at the end of two levers, being the leg, and moves the most. So with running, what should move the least? You start to think, okay, well, it should be kind of torso into head. Now, what influences that? The arms. If you're moving different left and right, if you've got force or directional patterns that aren't helpful, it's going to influence how you can hold the torso and therefore how you can hold or keep stability through hips. So that's where it's my thought process is what is most or what should be the most still or stationary and start from there. So looking at an athlete, it's like, what are their arms doing to influence and affect shoulders and torso and hips? Get them right. So then we can work on shoulders and torso and then kind of hips. And then, everything that comes off that are the legs and feet. If you've got hip movement or shoulder or torso rotation or movement, no amount of strength is going to keep the hips still. So you're not going to be able to use the legs as well. So again, coming back to what should be most still in a movement and then running, it should, around that torso, shoulders and into hips. So start there.
Awesome. So that's where we start. How do we know that we're even doing that in the first place? How do we create that self-awareness to go actually, because funny story, I've had my technique looked at and I thought, oh, there shouldn't be too much to change as one does. And of course there is. And I found, well, they found that I can't remember. I feel like he used the word lazy, but we're good friends, so he's allowed to use that.
Is
Lazy
it
in the
lazy
hips.
glutes? Yeah, lazy
No,
hips.
just lazy.
Yeah.
So I call it my hip swagger. You
Yeah.
don't do that in running though.
No, it's not
So
ideal.
yeah, and of course I didn't know this until he pointed out to me. So how do we create that self-awareness to know where to change or
What you're
improve?
doing. I think there's two ways you can do it if you're doing it by yourself. Like if you don't want to have someone have a look at it, or you're not interested in someone looking at it, or someone like myself to look at it, or even go through that process. The easiest thing to do is record yourself. You record yourself and have a look, because perception and reality within movements are 9 times out of 10 completely off. And you think you're
Yeah.
doing one thing and it's completely wrong. So just having that visual understanding of like, I feel like this is what as you just explained, you thought you had a movement in your head which you undertake when you are running, and you highlighted that it wasn't true. So just the visual capacity going like, that doesn't look like what it feels like. And that video doesn't lie. Like, so even just to start with, to record yourself and you go, okay, if you can see something that's different left and right, or you can see something like when you start running, actually asking yourself questions, like self-awareness questions of what does it feel like in this part of the body? Is there movement more on one side than the other? Like, am I pushing? Am I pulling? It's just like it's an asking of a question. But even that, it's very difficult to do by yourself. Like anything, you can and you can try it for sure, but it's just having that, checking into real specific areas within the body, listening to feeling, to actually sometimes looking. Like you can't look too much in running, but something like where your hands get to, or can you see one shoulder? Can you not? Can you see one foot more than the other? Or, like you can start to actually ask those questions of yourself when you're running. So that creates some semblance of self-awareness. What does it feel like? What does it look like on the video? How do they match up?
Yeah. And then what would you say once we sort of see that? Like if I say, I mean, see, for example, one elbow is kind of chicken wing style. I mean, is it just a matter of tuck the, I mean, I guess that's a great place to start, right? But where to from there?
Well, it can be something as simple as that, but then you're going, okay, well, we'll tuck it in, but why? Like, what is it? Why is it out there? Like, is it moving out there? Is it holding out there? Is it staying out there? Like, why is it out there in the first place? And it could be something as like your ribs or your whole shoulders are actually tilting to one side. And you're going, okay, well, I'm going to try and tuck my elbow in, but it's coming from the actual rib cage into shoulders, and then it's kind of creating those different angles. So it can become quite complicated in that regard, because everyone has their own discrete movement patterns, which I think is a part of the problem and the narrative around running. It's like, oh, no, everyone has their own movement patterns, but for some reason, that's the only movement in the world ever where you can have your own movement pattern and it's okay. Everything else, there's a better way of doing it and a more efficient way of doing it, except for running, which isn't the case. Like, there is a better way to do it, and there is a more efficient way of doing it. So it's understanding what is creating it, how to fix it then as well. Like, because that fix of that chicken wing elbow could come from somewhere else. So in that way, it can be quite difficult to do it by oneself.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So what is efficient running?
Um, it is a simplified movement pattern that has a coordinated pattern of movements from top half of the body into the lower half, being hips down. So hips up, coordinating with hips down in a good position. I guess that's probably the simplest way of thinking about it in an efficiency of a movement pattern.
Right. Okay.
Right.
That's a very efficient way
Yeah, well,
of
it's kind of because
explaining it.
the efficiency, you think about it, is spending less time on the ground, more time in the air,
Yeah.
creating a movement pattern that it uses elastic energy, so you can utilize the recoil effect of stretch, shorten cycle, muscles and tendons, uh, creating a momentum through position so that you can actually efficiently move from A to B with the littlest amount or the smallest amount of effort, with the maximum output.
Yeah. Awesome. When you're training someone and that you do find that there are these things that are coming up for them, how do you implement these new, I guess, could you call them habits or new technique cues for them? And how much do you then train it until, like, is there an amount? Because obviously, if you go with weight training, you only do a certain amount in a session and then, a certain amount over the week. What does that look like for retraining your gait?
Um, if you do it right, it should be better instantly. So the method of coaching with the new way, old way, teaching the person to understand and feel what old way feels like. If the cue you are using, if the way you're getting them to implement that cue is right, once you do the contrast and the comparison, the individual can tell you if it feels better or not. So for me, like within my sessions, it's not me saying just do that, keep at it, and you start to see some results. The kinesthetic awareness tells themselves to keep doing it. Like, so they go, oh, just that's better. And then it's more, and for me, it's about asking questions why it feels better to them. I can tell them what it looks better or what they're doing better, and we can go through that. So creating real awareness points between the contrast of, it might be hip extension, knee lift, time on ground, rotation, whatever it is for that individual, and getting them to feel a new way compared to old way. So we can say, what does it feel like? Where is it? What is it? Then they can actually tell me what it is. So rather than me saying, okay, keep doing that, here's the video, this is the best, like this is the new way versus the old way, can you see? They're telling me what's going on. But what they're doing is they're actually building that knowledge and the capacity to go, by the end of the session, a lot of people, the amount of people will say to me, I don't want to do old way. And
Yeah, this
that
feels better.
becomes, yeah, because this feels better. And there's the strength in the skill acquisition or the coaching method of it, because they're actually saying, I don't want to do it. The brain's really smart, but they go, that's it. It's a shit version. Why am I doing
Yeah,
that? Like
exactly.
spending more time on the ground, or it's hurting me more. In some cases where people were coming from an injury background, running is repetitive stress. Like it's a repetitive movement. And depending on where you're putting that stress will depend on where those injuries are coming. So if you can change it immediately in the session, what they'll start to do in some cases, not all of them, but I go, hang on, I can feel it. Like it's not, might not be sore. Like I'm aware of that area when I'm running in my old way. I don't even feel it in the new way. Or in some cases, it hurts in the old way. It doesn't hurt in the new way, which is kind of, that's a fun one because you can actually see him just going, Jesus, this is way better. And then going
Yeah.
back to your original question of how much do they do it? I mean, they just start running in a new way. And those awareness points will tell them when they go back to old and bang, new way back on, so that it can become autonomous. So it can become habit. And then we can work on the next piece. So I only ever work on one thing at a time. So they can just focus on that, maintain it, make sure it's habitual so it becomes natural. And then we can go to the next piece and the next piece. Now, depending on where you turn up or how crazy your movement patterns are, will depend on how many of those next pieces are. But even getting to some of the elites that I work with, they could be moving really, really well, but then, fine tune or refine for 4 months, or 5 months, or something like that. Like I felt something happening through this, and all of a sudden you can see that movement patterns change slightly. Like it's kind of fluid in that regard. It's never going to be stuck. So we're always just kind of then trying to bring someone back to where is best for them.
Yeah, I love that. And when you see someone, because you mentioned you only work one cue at a time, what is the most important cue? I know there's going to be differences in the person, that you're working with, but is there generally, like, if you see the same thing over and over, what is the one cue that you go with first?
Look, let's say 4 times out of 5, I'll start with arm swing. Like just so it's almost like the foundation of that movement pattern. Like running is a full body movement, and where it's all parts of the body are required within that movement, but not all parts of the body need to be moving. So I'll start with it so that I can then attack that kind of that torso position, function, center of mass, whatever it may be. So that allows me kind of that second and third layer of change, because it's nigh on impossible to change anything through there if you do have those funky movement patterns. You see all sorts of like movements that are occurring like through someone's arm swing, shoulder movement. So that's kind of almost impossible to focus down lower if I haven't changed that first. So yeah, it is normally the first protocol.
Yeah, amazing. I think you've just blown people's minds just there. What arms?
Yeah.
It's a leg thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and normally that's the case. You go, we run with our feet. Nah, like it's just the contact point. It's almost like the tires on a car. Like if you're just going to focus on the tires on the car and forget about the engine, the frame, what fuel goes into it. Like
Yeah.
even something like
Yeah.
that. Then
Yeah.
we're
The
kind of
wheel
focusing on the wrong
alignment.
part. Yeah, yeah. So everything kind of goes into before that, but that normally becomes the focal point. Because we can change it within a session. You can start to change how long or where you're landing as a result of what movements you're doing above it.
Amazing. Speaking of landing,
Mm.
timing. Well, I guess we could go in a few places with landing, like in terms of striking with the feet and then the timing of it. So you go
So,
where you want to go.
well, I get the strike pattern becomes one of the most talked about and most studied or researched parts of running, and then therefore probably some of the most divisive, just because you can try and study or research the change from like a heel. But the most common one is a heel strike to a midfoot, or heel strike to a forefoot. But the reality is, if that's all you're changing, there isn't going to be there's not going to be an increase in efficiency. In some cases, it's going to be a decrease, because you're adding another lever to that movement pattern. That lever being from heel to toe. So you're kind of adding another part of the body to the landing pattern, and then you're going to stress different parts of. It's misunderstanding of what creates that landing pattern. So if you think about the leg as taking away the foot, being, because that's that kind of the outcome, you've got the upper leg and the lower leg. So you've got two levers that you're working with. Now the upper body coordinates with the lower body, so top half coordinates with the bottom half. There's two parts that you can synchronize or pattern into. So you can synchronize or coordinate with the end of the femur or the end of the lower leg. So those movement patterns can actually coordinate with two different parts in the legs, depending or determining on what part you coordinate with will determine where the lower leg and therefore the landing occurs. So everything happens above it is actually creating that heel strike or that midfoot. So by just going from heel to mid, you're not really changing anything. You're still landing out in front. You're still using a lower leg or an overstride, which is what it's commonly referred to as. But it's just coordinated upper leg or lower leg. And that's the lower leg, which is creating a heel strike, which is creating a braking force, which is going into bones and joints. So there is a lot to it. Now, if you go back to just studying change heel to midfoot, or research patterns of marathon runners from start to the end, they talk about some marathoners that finish off with, an elite marathoners with a heel striking pattern. It's because they're patterning into the lower leg anyway. It's just that they're running at speeds that initially they're holding up higher, and then they refer back to under fatigue to their state of coordination up at a lower. And the two best examples would be like Kipchoge, Eliud Kipchoge, fastest marathon runner of all time. His movement patterns at the start of the marathon and to the end of the marathon are the same, or if not very similar. He has fatigued, so he's using more of his percentage, to create a force to maintain his pace, but the movement patterns are the same. As opposed to someone like Bekele or Katata, who start quite high up on kind of mid, but as they get more and more fatigued, those movement patterns start to present, which are their habitual movement pattern, which is a little bit more lower leg, and they kind of create that different landing pattern, which is more braking, which is more ground contact time, which means they have to work harder to maintain pace. So all three of them are elite. But then you're going to have a bigger engine to maintain the pace with a less efficient movement pattern, or you just can't run as fast. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's probably a long-winded answer to your
No,
question,
that's
but yeah,
so good because I mean it's really getting us to completely change our focus. I
yeah,
mean, like, yeah, every that's the common thing that I hear as well in the treatment room is people talking about the strike, the heel strike or midfoot or forefoot or whatever. And meanwhile, the foot is almost irrelevant because if you're not changing what you're doing above that, it won't matter.
well, yeah, and the other commonly used phrase about you land when you land, you create 8 times your body weight um, through the lower leg. But it's gonna be different depending on how you land or where you land in relation to your center of mass. And I think the research didn't necessarily describe how the 8 participants, which is quite a low number, were landing. So it was an average amongst the 8. So if you land on your heel, your load, the impact is not going to go through plantar fascia, Achilles, calf complex. It's going to hit heel and it's going to go through um, heel into knee, utilizing stability of ITB, glute med, quad, and then yes, stability through some calf and some hamstring. But then the calves are going to be used in a pulling mechanic, and a hamstring is going to be in a pulling mechanic rather than an extension and a pushing mechanic. So even something as simple as how you land is going to influence how you can, or where you are and what tissue you are using. So I often talk to coaches, like programming and coaches, and saying, look, it's fine to have the concept of increase load by 10%. That's normally the thought process, 5 to 10%. But that's assuming that you're loading tissue that can actually adapt in the same manner. Now, if you're loading more tissue that is more the bones and joints and then surrounding muscle, or stabilizing muscle rather than muscles and tendons over joints, then the tissue isn't going to adapt the same way, which where you start to become stress injuries or bone stress. So it's very different as to what you're loading, how and what mechanics you're loading and the tissue you're loading, which comes into the movement pattern.
Yeah, massive. You were saying with your example of the elites
Yep.
and the other two, once they fatigued, they, I guess, got into their fatigue pattern, if that's what you want to,
Yeah.
we'll call it
No,
that
it's,
today.
it's it's not a bad way of putting it. Yeah.
When when we're training and we want to make sure that we don't get to that stage where we're fatiguing and then start running not efficiently, should we be stopping there so that we don't practice that inefficient movement pattern, or do we run
Yeah.
through it and go, well,
It's a really good question because it's something that I've started to think about more in the last kind of 12 months. Because often we think about if you can't maintain the pace, like session over. So normally as a coach or as the programmer, it will be if you can't hold X, I mean, it's just not your day, and that's okay. So if you've got 10 reps at X pace and you get to 8 and you're starting to falter, then yeah, stop. And your question's a great one because you think if you get to 6, but then you're just kind of thrashing around to maintain the pace, for me, you start to think, well, maybe you need to stop at 6. Or if you're doing a long run and you just so happen to be fatigued and you're supposed to do 2 hours, but at an hour and 20, you start to kind of, lose form, or you can feel yourself starting to kind of get a little bit messy, then yeah, stop for 5 minutes or something to kind of, regather and go again. But if you can't hold it for the extended period of time, then, session's done, because as you said, then you're just practicing poor movement patterns, and then you're stressing areas of the body that are more susceptible, more often than not, more susceptible to stress and injury. And I think something that you do with the massage therapy, have hands on bodies so you can feel the tissues that are being stressed or are more than others. And the question then you can go is like, is this a part of the body that should be stressed whatever movement capacity it is, whether it be running, swimming, golf, tennis. I know tennis, probably multi-directional is probably not a great example. But if it's not the areas that should be stressed, that should straight away start to ring alarm bells. It's like, okay, well, you're using an area that probably shouldn't be the most used. Or if this is getting stressed in your back, or parts of the leg, tibialis anterior, often people talk about, hip flexors, tibialis anterior. Well, they're not the major movers. You shouldn't be stressing those areas. And whatever you are doing within that movement, you're stressing the wrong areas. Question the movement, not the strength or that sort of thing. So you can actually feel and you go, okay, well, there's something wrong here. You're not, like, it's a simple, like, you're not doing this right. Yeah, so that's that practicing of poor movement patterns under fatigue.
Yeah. And I think it's crazy because if you were in the gym and you were throwing heavy weight, like, you wouldn't be able to, like, once you get to fatigue, it becomes dangerous and you go, well,
Yeah.
I'm done
Yeah.
now. But we tend to push through whilst we're running.
Well, and like that's an example I use frequently of, like, if you have poor movement or poor technique in the gym, if you're starting to lift heavier weights, you're going to get injured. Or someone's going to say don't, because you're going to get injured. Because it is, like that injury is it's a stab to the heart. Like you get hit, you're injured, you're done. Whereas running, it's I use the analogy of death by 1,000 cuts. Like you can do it, and you can keep doing it, and it's doing like micro damage, which is why it's more tendinopathies for running, because it's just load after load in the wrong movement, load after load. I can kind of feel it, and then it's like I can wake up in the morning, but it kind of goes. And then it's I start my run, and the first couple of minutes, and it warms up, and it's okay. And then and all of a sudden, 6 weeks, 3 months down the track, it's I can feel it pretty much the whole time, but I can get through the run.
And if then I had $1 every time someone said that.
Exactly. And then it's like, and then you're broken, because all of a sudden you've got a chronic tendinopathy somewhere, or part of the bone stress reaction, stress fracture. So the running is death by 1,000 cuts, whereas in the gym, it's like, no, you're doing it wrong. Off you go. But the other thing I find really amusing with running technique is, so we're using the strength, or in the gym, it's, you run poorly, go do these strength exercises, and this is going to be good for your technique. When again, there's not a single other movement in the whole world where they go, "I'll just get stronger and you'll do it better." It's like telling Ben Simmons to get in the gym so he can do his shooting better. It doesn't work. Or telling a swimmer, "I'll just get in the gym and you'll have a better stroke." No, the technical aspect of swimming and hydrodynamics is so important and fundamental. If you don't do that right, no matter how strong you are. Whereas running, it's like, just go over there, do some deadlifts, come back. Yeah, you're running better. It doesn't work that way. Like, it's important.
Here's
like, it's
clams.
super important. Yeah. Just, don't start with clams. It's like, I want to run from A to B straight, but I'm going to practice going sideways. Like, that doesn't work. It's not a movement pattern you use in running until you do some multi-directional sports, no doubt, but not running, not triathlon, straight line. So yeah. I told you I was going to get to that point. I knew I was going to do it.
We'd get there.
Yeah.
Well, I heard you say this quote, and I really like it in context to what we're talking about. Strength doesn't change movement. Movement changes movement.
Yes. Yes.
You're like, how good is that?
Oh, that's well, I can't be any more clear about it. And I think sometimes I get in trouble because I'll sort of say that, or I'll try and it's me thinking directly in a technique capacity, not taking away for a second the importance of strength to improvement of performance, of conditioning for to try and keep away injury, the injury prevention side to it, and the rehabilitation when someone isn't as strong in an area that they should be. So certainly not saying that, but they're two separate pieces to the puzzle. And I think within running, it's always been, like the strength is, multifaceted. It can fix things all over the place. It can't. Like basic engineering, it suggests, like, if a bridge is falling down, you don't just stick a stronger piece into it. You understand why that piece is actually getting stressed. What is it that's creating the stress point there? Change it and put the stronger piece into it. So the simple engineering side to it kind of then feeds into, for me, the the functional side to it, which is running.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important thing to make sure we reiterate here is you can do all the strength that you want, but if you haven't changed the thing that makes you run poorly, which loads up, let's just say the knee, for example, then it doesn't matter what strength work you're
Doesn't matter.
doing if you're not running,
Yeah, and
changing the running
conversely,
pattern.
no amount of perfect technique is going to make you stronger. You're going to condition the areas that you want to condition, and you're more likely to, or less likely to get injured from because of running. But it's not going to make you stronger or more powerful or dynamic explosive movement to be utilized within that movement pattern. So it's the same the other way around. Can't
Yeah.
just say, well, I'm running perfectly, so I'm strong. No, they're two different portions. Well, I'm running really well now and with great technique, so my sleep's better. No, it's a different portion. Eating different portion, hydration different portion. They're all different pieces to a puzzle that make up an athlete.
Yeah, brilliant. Awesome, love it. Let's talk. I guess this is could potentially almost be the same, but we were talking about timing, cadence. Does this matter? Should we have more steps, less steps? When
Well,
does it
I
matter?
mean, if we could spend the entire time in the air, how easy would running be? So, exactly. So running would be awesome. So in that case, you think lower amount of steps done well is going to be better off. So if you spend less time on the ground, more time in the air, irrespective of the pace, a low cadence can be actually okay. It can also be influenced by the fact that someone could be 6'10" or 5'2". So they're going to have to take more or less depending on the length of their levers and then the movement. However, you can have a really good, let's use the number 164, because at an easy pace, that's about where I'm at. 164. You can have a good 164, or you could have a really shit 164. So that 164 could be very little time on ground, a lot of flight time. Distance per step is, say it'd be around that 1.2 meters, 1.3 meters, depending on, the individual or the pace you're running at. Or you could have 0.9 of a meter for a step and a heap of ground contact time, which means you can only take 164 steps. So the same number can represent two completely different movement patterns and therefore stress points and efficiency marker. So that output or that outcome is determined by what's happening. And using that number specifically, or using cadence as a reference point to change, can assist in some cases to kind of lighten a load or get someone to kind of take away some of their braking force, but it's not necessarily going to change the pattern that's creating it. So yeah, it's an output. It'd be like trying to change technique using speed. Like speed is an output. So there is no magic number, and trying to hit a specific magic number will take a lot of effort and energy for a lot of people, just to make a number, which isn't going to help what they're doing or how they're doing it. So it's a reference point.
Yeah.
But not a changer.
Yeah. Fix the
I think,
technique.
it does. It influences everything. It's what's sort of getting put into it. But then, how powerful are you to create a bigger flight time within your movement capacity as well? So you could actually go faster with the same cadence, and everything else work the same, but you're just covering more distance per step. So yeah, then the strength comes into it. So there's all those different factors that come into it. The number, and I hate using the number or actually saying the number, really was from a study of elite 10-kilometer runners, and they're all running against each other, and they're all similar height, and they're all running the same pace because they're running against each other. So what do you know? Their cadence is very similar. If you start to break down a question where it comes from, you start to understand, well, it's not a good input to run an easy pace at the same cadence as your tempo or sprint. Saying Usain Bolt has to run at the same number as the rest of us. There's a range. There's going to be a range determined by so many different factors. but we get caught up or we get told that it's so important.
Yeah, yeah. So if we're out, how do you work out like the tempo run for yourself?
For the way I talk about it is like range of motion determines your output. So let's just think about like a really good mover, and because we want to start at some sort of base, like someone who moves really, really well. We think we don't want to increase the step rate or the cadence until you've gone through all the gears first, because you want to work through gears before then you kind of use revs. So it depends on the movement capacity of the person actually undertaking that. Once they get to their full range, and it could be determined by um, flexibility. Like that's where flexibility can come into it. You go, well, if you can't get to a really good extension of flexion range through, hip range, or if you're then adding different movements, it's going to influence it as well. Well, then you go, okay, well, there's your range. If you are fit enough to hold that full range, and then you can go faster by taking more of those full ranges rather than just cutting down the range and just taking multiple steps. So we want to think about it in like how they're doing it, what they're doing it. So range of motion will determine output, and then you can increase the revs from there.
Awesome. I feel like almost every no, that's not nice. Not almost every. A lot of clients that I've seen in the past who run do not stretch. And yet here we go. We've just said that range of motion is
It
really
can.
important.
Well, I think the thing we need to understand about running, like it's so submaximal. So if 80 or 90% of your running is done at like 60% of range, 70% of range, let's kind of use that area. The fascia around is going to adapt and adopt that range. So then you can go into like the manipulation of the fascia, where there's static long holds for yin styles, which is that's where it's going to actually release fascia rather than muscle. But if that fascia is tight, you're not going to have that range, and running just plays itself straight into that area because you're actually going to just adopt the range you use. And then you go and I kind of start doing some speed stuff. I go, geez, I'm really restricted. I'm just going to have to just turn over. You go, well, hang on, what's restricting you? Because often the muscles aren't the part that actually is restricting an individual. It's then more the fascial tissue that's actually holding that muscle, which, yeah, that just kind of plays into it.
So important. And I feel like that's so important. Obviously, well, it is important to state because I've heard the thought process of, well, it needs to be tight because that provides that recoil and the rebounding. And so I don't want to stretch because I don't want that to diminish that.
Yeah, I'm not one of those thought processes because I mean, again, going back to the distance running in particular, like sprinting is a little different thing again, which I think is probably overused. Let's have really tight ankles to create that and hold really tight ankles, but then run relaxed. So the end of your levers, you're holding tension and you're expecting the whole body to relax. Like it just, for me, as far as a physiological, it doesn't work. Can't hold tension in one end and then have a relax. So the natural setup of the foot and the neural pathways, if you start to touch the ground, it'll naturally actually create tension when required rather than holding tension when it's not. So I think there's a little bit of lost portion in the high end capacity, or things to be researched a little bit more or understood probably a little bit better, I think. But again, going back to say distance running and whether it's within triathlon or just for a strict runner from elite through to novice, even at elite, they're running at sub-maximal paces for an extended period of time. So at no point should be holding or trying to create like a real stressed force because it's running at 60%, 70%. What you're trying to do it is as fluid and as freely as possible for an extended period of time. So you shouldn't be holding and creating tension because it is submaximal. It's like trying to, flex muscles, but only 60%. You go, okay, well, you can't really flex at 60. Like it's just holding strength or creating strength. So then it's, it's not tension.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my thought process as well. It's like trying to create a movement pattern, which then allows fluid-free movement, the muscles required for stability and strength will work to the level that they're required to. You don't need to kind of force them into it.
As long as you're doing the right technique.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm even doing poor technique. You don't want to stress it either. Like you don't want to, like, I'm going to try. The reality is though, for you to run faster, you're going to have to use minor levers, minor muscles hard to maintain that pace. So it's like, oh, I'm going to run at effort. I think sometimes that becomes really difficult to go, like within a structured training program, they're going, okay, well, let's use effort levels to be our prescriptor. Like, hard, easy, medium. Very rarely should be hard because again, it's submaximal. Even like the hard days, race day, like as a 5K race, it's still hard, but the effort level whilst running shouldn't be like, oh, that's hard. It should be fluid for as long as possible until you get to that last kilometer, 2 kilometers and go, now I'm trying to hold on to this free, open, powerful movement. So thinking about like the power, low power, high power, rather than effort. It's just kind of thinking through different ways to kind of word it so that the athlete can actually get the best version for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Reframing it.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, words are so important in that regard.
Absolutely.
And then the clarity of it too, as to how it feels to a certain person, which is why range of motion becomes for me really important, because you think about different alternatives or different thought processes. Say you and I were 10 to 15 meters apart and we're just throwing a tennis ball to each other. I'm not going to wind up and throw the shit out of it and then try and really decelerate so I don't piff you in the head. All I'm going to do is just like kind of just do a smaller movement. Or in golf, 60-meter shot, you're not going to use the full swing. So you're going to try and maintain or manage it. So the same with running. Yeah. So if you want to run slower, move less. Like move less. So your displacement, your output is less. Pace will come down rather than trying to slow yourself down. It's like just do a smaller version. Or to run faster, do a bigger version. Until you can't do a bigger version, then do more of those versions. So kind of giving a real clarity to the difference between it all as well in a movement capacity.
Absolutely. Oh, fantastic. Let's talk about breathing.
Do it.
Do it? Should we?
Yeah.
All right.
It's
Noted.
handy.
Next.
That's helpful. Yeah. Glad we tick that one off.
How do we, breathing in the sense that do we need to, or should we find a rhythm? Should we use music? Should we only be breathing through our nose? Because nose breathing is very much coming to the forefront of health, and it should, because you should always be nose breathing. But then, when we exert ourselves, obviously we go to mouth breathing. So tell us, what should we do when we're running, training?
I guess it depends on what the focus of that run is. I mean, if you're trying to do like a strictly aerobic, they often talk about different zones, but essentially it's like to stay in the aerobic zone, where you're utilizing only oxygen as your energy source. Then if you're using the nose breathing as a method of saying, okay, if you're starting to breathe too much, you're probably going outside the aerobic. Like it's an avenue that some use. So it's like run at a pace, move at a pace that you can continually go just using nose breathing. Now, the more you do it, the better you get at it, because you are getting better at working in that aerobic zone. So you can start to go faster and faster and faster. So it's less to do with the fact that you're nose breathing. It's giving that as almost like a control method of saying use that as your control.
Awesome. Language again.
Yeah. So it's about controlling the pace and the effort level that you're undertaking so that you can work in a really specific zone, so that you're building a capacity with that aerobic zone. And once you build that aerobic zone, what you're doing is you're actually kind of pushing up your lactate threshold zone and your VO2 zone, which is out of my, I guess my specialty in those zones. But physiology, like if you're not working in a VO2 specific zone, you're not pushing that level up. And what runners normally do is they just work in that mid zone, which is that lactate threshold zone. Now they're working at the low end when they're doing their aerobic runs, and they're at the higher end when they're doing their tempo and their faster runs. So they're never actually working in the specific zone. So using that nose breathing can control the person to say, working the aerobic. The more you do it, the better you get at it, the faster you can start to go. And you go, oh, this nose breathing is fantastic for me. No, you're just getting better at working in that aerobic zone and just utilizing oxygen because you're using a control method. Yeah, so I think it's just is a method of control and can be really helpful depending on the individual. Like, so some people are really good at it already and they can just kind of cruise along when they're working in that aerobic zone. And if they tried to do nose breathing, they could probably do it really well as well because they are working in that aerobic zone. I don't necessarily think it's going to get to a point where you can actually run your fastest just nose breathing because the mouth is a bigger hole and you can get more oxygen in, which means you can actually run and create a more powerful output. So yeah, it depends on what you want to get out of it.
What do you tell the beginner runner who obviously you got in for some technique sessions and they're like, how should I breathe?
That comes back into what are you trying to...
I just want to run.
Yeah. So it's like, well, if you're just trying to run, like it's the controlled breathing. So you can use something like that nose breathing. And it's like, okay, what are you trying to get out of it? You know, is it just that you're running 2 or 3 times a week, which is fine, perfect. Like, and you want to smash yourself, then you're gonna have to breathe more. Once they start to increase the amount, or if they want to increase the frequency or the intensity, then you're going to start to say, well, you're going to have differing levels of where you want to have that breathing, as in like how hard, how heavy, how light. So it's understanding the individual, but something as simple as like how they hold their torso and how they hold, particularly like thoracic spine, is going to influence and affect how much oxygen they can bring in. So if you think about you know, when we run, we do hard efforts, and often, you know, you get to...
No, I don't do hard efforts.
Well, when you're in the gym, or when you know, okay, like sure. When you're physically exerting yourself to a point where you really want to stop and take some oxygen.
Absolutely.
The first thing we often do is like stop, put hands on the knees to try and draw in air, because that position actually allows us to draw deeper into lungs, into belly, to create more oxygen intake. So the body's naturally going into a position where they can get more oxygen, rather than, you know, like that traditional of, you know, hands on heads and walk around so you can fill your lungs with air. Like, there's a reason why it feels harder to draw air in while you're doing that, because it's harder to draw air in. So if you think about it in a movement capacity of running, like depending on how you actually hold chest, thoracic, lumbar, will actually influence where and how much you can actually draw in. Do you want to do a little test?
Let's do it. Am I going to embarrass myself?
No. It's like just an example of like how you hold your posture will actually influence as to how
let's do it.
Draw in. So what I want you to do, so if you like just sort of sit in your chair, or you can stand up if you want. I don't know if it becomes
I'll stay seated.
Yeah. So if you actually kind of push your chest out, because you think about running, it's a lot of that, you know, chest out so you can feel it with it. So kind of lift it out to that real big chest. Yeah. And take the biggest, deepest breath in and out that you can.
Sorry, did you say in and out of the mouth, or?
And out? No, just
in and out. Cool.
Now get back into a little bit more of a neutral position where you're kind of in, you know, like neutral spine. Take the biggest, deepest breath in and out that you can. Can you feel the difference between the two?
Yes.
What did you notice?
Neutral was lovely.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's actually because you're not stretched. So you're not actually limiting a capacity. So when we're running, where oxygen is so key, if we're going to get into that position, we're going to limit some capacity. It's going to have other influences about where we hold our mass and the angles that we're holding our hips as well, which becomes really important. But just something as simple as the capacity to breathe becomes influenced by how well or how poorly we hold ourselves.
That's so interesting, because when you said thoracic, in my mind, I went to sort of that hunched over thought. I didn't even think about the chest open position.
The more often than not, people will be in a thoracic extended position rather than a flexed position. Very rarely will you see many people really hunched, particularly when running. And then we get caught, you know, told to shoulders back and chest
Yeah,
out as
chest
a
proud.
postural thing. Yeah, chest proud, but it's not. It's actually extended through thoracic. We want to find a
Mm.
middle point, and we don't want to go down the other way either. So trying to find the middle point. So even within running, our posture is determined by how we hold and how we hold our spine and where we hold our mass, and it can change depending on what we're doing. We don't want to have extremes on either end, but we're often more at the extended extreme than the neutral or then flexed. But for someone who goes from extended into neutral is going to feel hunched just because their perception is their normal
Yes.
is extended. So anything further forward is going to feel rounded. But yeah, something as simple as that is going to influence and affect breathing. So it depends on what they're doing and how they're doing is to say, okay, well, breathe like this. Well, how are you actually holding yourself?
Brilliant. So good. You've pretty much just said one of them, as in the next question is what are the common myths around running? And you've just said, that chest proud is what you commonly hear, and it's debunked. What are other common myths that we hear?
Well, it's similar to that one. It's like, run tall, chest out, but lean forward. Yeah, well, which one is it? Am I running tall and, because it's upright and chest out, or am I leaning forward? They're completely two different things, but there's two of the probably the most common cues or coaching techniques, cues that are given to runners, but they're completely against each other because they're two different positions. The running tall, you want to be high off the ground. You want to spend more time in the air than on the ground. If you are moving really well and you're creating flight time, you're spending more time up and you look and you run tall. But it's an output of what's happening rather than, think of the string and pull yourself straight up from the top of the head so you're running like that. But then again, lean forward and go, well, hang on, which way is the string which way is the string going? So that was some of the things that I started the question, early on. I was like, well, if they don't work, then they don't work. And is it something as simple as they're well intentioned and they should work if given a better meaning, or is it that they just don't work? And something like that we've spoken about just doesn't work. Whereas if you think about, lean from the ankles is someone that often gets spoken about to get that forward mass, mass forward. And getting to that point where you don't lean enough, where you go and topple, it's trying to create that angle of the body. Now it's well intentioned and it is okay, but once you start running, your reference point is moving. So once you think about, if you're leaning from the ankles and then you start running, that reference point being the ankles is gone. So am I still in position or not? So the whole idea is actually getting a center of mass and moving it forward. So why not let's just focus on the center of mass and get it forward? So there's things like that, which is a little bit different where you're going, okay, well, it's well-intentioned and we're trying to get the right thing, but maybe there's a different way or a better way of explaining it and getting someone to actually have a reference point that they can focus on when running rather than it being, turned over at high velocity or high frequency.
Right. So if we're not leaning forward, we are focusing on
The center of mass. Yeah. So you're focusing on the center of mass. So where is your center of mass? And everyone's going to be a little bit different. And we're trying to actually manipulate or manage that part rather than leaning from or bending from the ankles and the feet.
Yeah.
It's like, let's create a focal point that you continually focus on, or you can keep focus on. And then how does that affect the body and your spatial awareness? It's a really difficult one just because it is a real intrinsic cue rather than extrinsic. So it's like, how do I feel it? What am I noticing when I am in a good position? And that's the hard part with the coaching portion of it. And it is one of the harder cues to kind of implement or teach. But it is giving a focal point of what's important. What is it that we're trying to change? How about we focus on that portion?
Yeah. Brilliant. Shoes, do they matter?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, particularly when you start running like at high loads, high frequencies, high intensities, you're beating your feet up, and depending on what surface you're running on as well, like there's a protection mechanism, there's an impact and a frequency mechanism, and also now there's a performance mechanism to a lot of the shoes as well. So there are, varying degrees. Yeah, just something as simple as protecting your feet. Yes. And then is it just from the surface? Is it from the impact? Is it from the intensity? Yeah. Yes, I understand the barefoot background, and in some cases, or in some capacities, I agree with the proprioceptive nature that can provide. But I've also seen a heap that use the barefoot shoes or barefoot that run with really poor mechanics. So it really goes against not the argument, but the reasoning behind doing it. Someone's still using a different movement capacity, a different movement pattern. So I can understand it, and for some reasons I agree with it, but I'm not necessarily an advocate for it, particularly for people who are running longer distances, higher intensities. Yeah, it can be something to be added.
So what about then when you see, I mean, because you can see some really built up cushioned shoes.
Yeah.
Is that the other end of the spectrum where you go?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, for sure, it can be. Particularly, I mean, you can run with really good technique with those built-up shoes, or those shoes can allow you to run with really poor. Like it's not the shoe, but it can actually have that proprioceptive nature to allow someone to go back to a really lazy or messy pattern. So that they can be factors to it, but you can actually move really poorly with zero drop or barefoot shoes, but you can run really well. Same at the other end of the spectrum. I think what they're used for well are for those that do need to take some stress off, like the padding of the foot, who are running big miles or do have susceptibility to, foot natured bruising, impact issues. So using them in a manner that might be once or twice a week to just take the load off. Or if it's for the real elites who do double runs, it's like, okay, well, if they're doing hard efforts or just a longer run in the morning, they're using them in the afternoon just to kind of do their 30, 40 minutes in the same movement pattern, just to kind of take a little bit of load off. But you're right, like they can add a requirement of proprioception, like an instability. So where does that instability go? Is it through the ankle, through the knee? What are they doing and how are they doing it to therefore create that instability? Yeah, there is a lot to it, and it is dependent on in a few different factors.
Yeah, all things to be aware of.
Yeah. It's like everything. Like it's not just one. Can't always just pinpoint into one thing. There's no
Exactly.
just one magic bullet. I'll wear this shoe and you won't be injured anymore. You can utilize them in conjunction to some of the rehabilitative or movement change or strength improvement. But it's the easiest thing to do though, because you go, okay, well, if I can just spend a couple $100 on a pair of shoes, I put them on, I can run more. Of course I'm going to. Well, yeah, it's a bit of a band-aid, fix, or it could even be seen as a bit of a crutch. Like you put a moon boot on people who are injured until they're not injured anymore until you take them off. So it's just like it could be a semi crutch. Yeah.
Let's move to drills.
I feel like you've done a lot of research.
What do you mean?
Well, yeah.
This I take this very seriously.
No, I love it. It's good. You're just
Drills, are
me.
they important? Should we be doing them? What should we be doing? Do they make us a better runner?
It depends on what you're using them for. Like I think if it's for a warm-up capacity and you're getting yourself moving so that you are moving better in regards to warmed up and functioning like you should, then yeah, they're good. They're good for warm-ups. They're good for getting you moving. They're a little bit of a variety. But they're used a lot to say that, okay, if you do your half an hour drills, then it's good for technique. Unless you apply the movement you are undertaking within the drill into your running movement. You're not just going to be able to do like a high knees drill and then expect you to have a better range of motion through the femur if you're not giving yourself more time per step to actually go through a better range of motion. So I think it's understanding that they can be used if you then specifically identify a movement that you're trying to get the person to do within their running. Otherwise, they're really great for, activation and warming up and getting yourself into the capacity to run fast. But I'd go as far as saying that drills aren't really going to help your technique specifically unless combined.
Yeah. Awesome. So should we include them in a warm-up?
Yeah. Oh, I can't see why not. Like, particularly if that's something should. I don't do a couple of bodyweight squats and off a run, and that doesn't mean it's the right way to do it. I think that if I was to do some, I might do the first couple of kilometers better, or I might be warmed up a little bit better. I think it can be beneficial for the individual who wants to run frequently, so they're getting that real kind of professional attitude, for sure, no doubt. And it's just a good way of warming up. I just like to kind of warm up with a little bit slower for the first kilometer and then start to kind of work into it. So, the first thing we do, if in any other sport, footy, hockey, it's like, okay, go do a couple of laps, warm up. And then you do your, you do your drills. And if that's part of your run, awesome. I just want to do the couple of laps, we'll do a kilometer and go, okay, I'll just keep running. That's just my preference. But yeah, if you like them, well, yeah, let's do them. If you find like you get benefit out of them, good. Yeah. If you need to, because of functional, like if you are tight in certain areas and you do need to kind of spend a little bit more time warming up or safeguarding, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Paul, this has been so good. I really appreciate your time. If people want to find out more about you or your coaching programs, how can they find you?
Best two places to look are tbrunner.com. So just look at the options that I have in regards to retraining, whether it be one-on-one or the online format. So you can take yourself through the skills and how I do what I do. Or if just interested in getting a little bit more or researching a little bit more or just kind of following along would be Instagram. So at the Balanced Runner. I have a fair bit of different content there where it becomes some of the athletes that I work with, just some thoughts, or anything that's kind of annoying me at the time, or just highlighting some differences or some comparisons, whether it be some of my athletes or some athletes I see. So that'd be the way to kind of have a little bit more of or build of a confidence or get an understanding of what I do and how I do it.
Yeah, awesome. Again, Paul, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Let's finish off with one question here. So if there's anything or any technique tips that you could give people right now to do, they're just about to go for their run, what's something they can think about as they go for their run?
Look, I'd always go with try and get some perception of what you're doing first. Like ask yourself, like do a systems check. What does it feel like? Is it in time? Something as simple as and let that kind of feed into probably the next bit, but do a systems check. What does it feel like? Am I making the same movements? What position do I feel like? Am I feeling stress, or where am I holding stress? And then something as simple as, at least if I can run evenly left and right, even if it's a really poor movement, if I can at least load and move similarly or the same with some semblance of symmetry left and right, and in time and even timing, it's a good start. It's somewhere that they can go, okay, well, at least I'm even left and right. Because as I said right at the start, I wasn't when I first started to think about it. My movements are a little bit different, and that's going to create different stress points left and right. So yeah, systems check, get a feel for what and how you're doing what you're doing, and at least if you can kind of try and keep some symmetry of time and timing, that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, awesome. Leave those headphones behind.
Yeah,
for this session.
For this session, yeah, for this one, yeah. But and it's good. It's handy. It's handy to listen sometimes. Like it's a really easy thing to use where you go, does it sound the same? You know, like you can often hear differences if you start to question it, or if you start to actually, you know, be a little bit more mindful of it. You can actually start to hear it, and then you go, okay, well, what is it that's happening?
Yeah, brilliant. Paul, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
That was Paul Mackinnon from The Balanced Runner. Make sure you head over to all his socials, give him a follow, and check out his website for all of his programs and memberships. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with your friends, leave a review, and of course, subscribe to the podcast because every little bit helps. I really appreciate you listening in. Thank you so much for your time. Have the best day, week, month, and year. And here is to a world of bodies built better.